I think. I think it's the best record we've ever made, which I don't always believe when you finish. By the time the records come out, I'm normally finding fault with them already.
At 70, Elvis Costello didn't just stir the pot, he cracked it wide open. In a moment no one saw coming, the legendary punk poet dropped a set of reflections that reached far beyond nostalgia. He didn't rant, he didn't attack. Instead, he delivered a calm, unfiltered account about someone many thought they knew. Agnetha Faltskog, 1/4 of ABBA, and often dismissed as the quiet, graceful recluse, suddenly found herself the center of a narrative few expected, and even fewer were ready for. What did Costello really see? And why now, after all these years, did he decide to say it? One lost opportunity, in particular, might just be the missing piece to a decades-old puzzle. The interview that shook the music world. In April 2025, Elvis Costello sat down for what was expected to be a routine promotional interview until it took a sharp and unexpected turn. Speaking candidly, Costello made pointed remarks about Agnetha Fältskog of ABBA that sent shockwaves through the music world. He described her not just as an iconic voice of pop, but as a deeply troubled figure whose image had concealed a much more complex reality. His comments were not offhand or playful. They were deliberate, heavy with reflection, and laced with a tone of finality. While many fans had long accepted the carefully maintained narrative of Agnetha as a reclusive but graceful star, Costello's statements forced a sudden reevaluation. The part that stunned listeners wasn't just the resurfacing of a decades-old rift, but the way Costello spoke with both sharp criticism and unexpected empathy. He openly admitted to harboring resentment toward Agnetha for years following an incident in 1979, but also acknowledged a fascination with what he described as her ice-thin composure and invisible wounds. He hinted at a performer burdened not by ego, but by an intense fear of being seen for who she really was. This wasn't a tabloid-worthy scandal. It was a veteran musician laying bare his complicated perception of another artist, one he had apparently never fully understood until much later in life. The interview blew up in the headlines as the Costello Confession, while the entire social media dissected each and every sentence. For some, it sounded harsh and unwarrantedly personal, while others claimed it was a rare truth-telling gesture in an industry that all too frequently preserves sanitized myths about its stars. And even fans of ABBA and Costello himself were debating if he crossed any boundaries or merely told the tale others didn't dare to share. Agnetha's camp has not made any immediate response, which only added fuel to the fire of speculation about how she might have received the comments. It really changed things in Costello's usual cagey disposition as he spoke about Agnetha, and how he became really exposed while doing it. He would not only talk of a bust-up, but years of unresolved and lingering confusion, regret, and fascination. Was it just admiration under a mask of judgment? Was he finally confronting some issues that he had allowed to remain unresolved? It seemed incomprehensible that Elvis Costello would be the one to pull back the curtains on such an icon's hidden history. Yet in just a couple of minutes, he managed to do so, and the world sat listening. Just when the music world thought it had heard the worst, the real origin of the fallout came roaring out of. When punk clashed with pop. The tension between Elvis Costello and Agnetha Fältskog began at a glitzy industry party in London in 1979, a night many in attendance would never forget. The music world was at a cultural crossroads. Punk's raw edge was clashing with pop's polished dominance. ABBA, at the height of global fame, represented the clean commercial perfection of the charts. Costello, on the other hand, had carved out a reputation for cutting through the mainstream with pointed lyrics and no-nonsense critiques. It was only a matter of time before these two worlds collided. And that night, under the haze of champagne and cigarette smoke, they did, with explosive results. Accounts from the event describe the initial conversation between Costello and Agnetha as polite but tense. What started as industry small talk reportedly shifted when Costello made a scathing remark about ABBA's image, allegedly calling their sound manufactured fluff, and labeling Agnetha a puppet of the pop machine. The reaction was immediate and severe. Witnesses said Agnetha's expression turned cold, her composure faltering before she lashed out in anger. Though the exact words exchanged were lost in the stunned silence that followed, what's clear is that she stormed out, visibly shaken. Costello remained behind, unmoved and unapologetic. It left a very awkward atmosphere at the party, but nevertheless started a rift that could be sustained for decades. Industry insiders suggested that neither Agnetha nor Costello made contact with each other after that night. To this day, that incident remains an unspoken episode in music history, mentioned only in whispers or veiled memories. What made it stand out even more is the clash's symbolic overtones of division between not only two persons with two styles, but also attitudes and philosophies about music. Pop harmony against punk dissent. Carefully curated image against raw authenticity. Two artists on opposite ends of a generational divide. This event kind of sank almost without a trace from the public eye, but stayed clear in the memory. For Costello, as he confirmed in later interviews, it served as an episode that influenced him greatly, frustrating him and providing curious insights into someone he would describe with surprising complexity. For Agnetha, who never talked about that night, a communion such as this may have been yet another hammering on the nails that kept shutting the door on the public stage. The encounter was a brief one, but it created lingering bitterness. Was it simply a personality conflict, or something emblematic of two musical ideologies that could never coexist? What Elvis claimed he saw in her eyes. During his revealing 2025 interview, Elvis Costello did more than recount a long-standing feud. He offered a rare psychological snapshot of Agnetha Faltskog that caught many off guard. He described a moment during their tense exchange in 1979 when he saw something beneath the anger. Not arrogance, but fragility. According to Costello, there was a brief flicker in her eyes, a crack in her controlled exterior that revealed deep insecurity. He claimed that in that split second, he realized Agnetha wasn't just protecting an image, she was protecting herself. And that, he suggested, stayed with him for decades. Costello's tone shifted as he reflected on what he now believes was emotional pressure that went far beyond the typical demands of stardom. He spoke about sensing an ice-thin composure, something brittle holding up a public figure that millions adored, but few truly understood. In his view, Agnetha wasn't a diva drunk on fame. She was a woman battling immense internal pressure to maintain an impossible level of perfection. While the world saw polished performances and serene expressions, Costello claims he saw someone on the edge, someone terrified of being exposed as less than perfect, perhaps even to herself. What makes this observation so compelling is that it didn't arrive from a tabloid or anonymous source. Instead, it came from one artist to another, someone who has also experienced the unrelenting glare of publicity. Costello's reflections were not mocking, but appeared rather to be a battling of sorts with hindsight, as if he were just now beginning to grasp what that moment really meant. This also begs an important question. How many other artists may have gotten Agnetha wrong over the years? Was the coldness described so many times by those who worked with her simply a defense mechanism? And if so, How much of the public image was truly a defense, and how much was really her? Costello's words humanized and nuancified what was already an old argument. Rather than casting Agnetha as just difficult or distanced, he painted a portrait of someone carrying emotional burdens that few could see. Perhaps he's projecting, or perhaps time has dulled his memory. But during that interview, the quiet conviction in which he spoke became powerful. He was less retelling some old confrontation than coming to terms with a misjudgment. In doing so, he added depth to a public figure long defined by surface impressions, and perhaps offered a kind of belated empathy she never received at the time. The decline behind the curtain. As Agnetha Fältskog transitioned from global ABBA stardom to a solo career in the 1980s, the spotlight followed her, but so did increasing tension behind the scenes. Producers and collaborators began to speak, often quietly and off the record, about how difficult recording sessions had become. What many had expected to be a fresh creative era for her was frequently interrupted by erratic behavior, sudden cancellations, and strained working relationships. Multiple insiders described an environment where perfectionism morphed into inflexibility, and where creative disagreements turned into emotional confrontations. Perhaps the most high-profile fallout was her reported refusal to work with Phil Collins on a potential duet. Industry insiders say the collaboration was not only discussed, but outlined in detail, with producers hoping to merge Collins's emotional gravitas with Agnetha's iconic vocals. However, according to sources close to the project, Agnetha rejected the proposal outright, allegedly unwilling to share artistic control or compromise on direction. That refusal wasn't an isolated incident. Others in Sweden's tight-knit pop scene recounted similar frustrations. Some even walked out of sessions mid-project, describing the atmosphere as too tense to function. What occurred here was more than just a case of artistic ambition against logistical reality. Over the years, her surrounding company had begun to suspect that something more serious than that was happening. Some called her impossible, but much heavier charges were hurled. Paranoid, unpredictable, emotionally unstable. These were not mere media courting charges, but came from studio collaborators and colleagues. Rumors went around of sessions that promised to produce miracles, but devolved instead into silence, tears, or sudden withdrawals. A producer once claimed working with her was walking on a tightrope over broken glass. The other part of the story was not simply creative conflicts, but rather a talented artist who was increasingly losing the ability and/or will to deal with that collaborative energy. Was there an element of a misunderstood genius protecting her vision at all costs? Or was it a slip off the sanitized pathway instance of one artist gradually coming apart? While their fans admired her solo work, not many were privy to the chaos that often surrounded these recordings. What could have come off as artistic freedom would perhaps also stem from a more painful orientation. In the years that followed, Agnetha's appearances would grow less frequent, and those early solo years, though commercially successful, now look more and more like the beginning of a long retreat. The 2004 comeback catastrophe. In 2004, after more than a decade of near-total silence, Agnetha Fältskog announced a long-awaited return to music with the album My Coloring Book. For fans and industry insiders, this was not just another release. It was a cultural event. The anticipation was intense. Agnetha had promised interviews, a European promotional tour, and select appearances. The rollout was designed to reintroduce her to a global audience, many of whom had only seen glimpses of her since her ABBA days. The label invested heavily, and the press began circulating stories of her quiet triumph. But then, just as quickly as it had begun, the comeback fell apart. Within weeks of the album's release, Agnetha began canceling scheduled appearances without explanation. Promised interviews were scrapped last minute. Reporters showed up to press events only to be told she was unavailable. According to people close to the rollout, the label was blindsided. Millions had been spent. Marketing campaigns had been locked in. But behind the scenes, things had spiraled into chaos. Rumors emerged of panic attacks, emotional breakdowns, and hotel room confrontations. One account described Agnetha sobbing in a green room moments before a planned TV interview, unable to go on stage. It wasn't just some emotional aftermath, and no, it involved professionals as well. Reports indicate a conflict between the promo team and her manager about salvaging as much as they could. Actually, according to some insiders, she went into the hermit's cell called Her. At one speculation stage, there were unofficial reports saying that she was even considering scrapping the whole album or canceling her contract. To the public eye, all that it would see is that tour that never happened and the ever-disappeared star. But for those in the industry, it spelled an unmistakable sign that Agnetha's relationship with the spotlight was irreparably broken. To this very day, there still remain questions on what really triggered this collapse. Was it the pressure that came with being a public figure after such a long time in seclusion? Was it with internal strife between her and the label? Or did she just reach the point where performing, however controlled, became impossible for her? My coloring book was intended to celebrate her voice and legacy, and instead, it became the moment when the world learned that her retreat from fame was permanent, not voluntary. And while the album was praised for its emotional depth, its release only further highlighted the fragile line Agnetha had long walked between creative expression and personal survival. Long before that comeback unraveled, the cracks had already started forming during ABBA's golden years, hidden behind smiles and spotlight. Success wrapped in silent suffering. While ABBA's global fame defined an era, life behind the scenes was far from the fairy tale. For Agnetha Fältskog, the group's commercial peak coincided with personal turmoil that few outside the band truly understood. At the height of their success, Agnetha was not only dealing with the relentless pressures of international stardom, but also the emotional weight of performing love songs alongside her ex-husband, Björn Ulvaeus. Their separation in 1980 made headlines, but the reality of continuing to work so closely with him, singing lyrics filled with heartbreak and longing, was a quiet burden she carried in front of millions. Adding to the emotional strain was her widely known fear of flying, which significantly disrupted the group's touring schedule. As ABBA's international demands grew, Agnetha became increasingly reluctant to travel. She missed several key promotional trips, including visits to the United States and Japan, creating tension within the group and among their management. What might have seemed like difficult behavior from the outside was, in reality, a deep-seated phobia that further isolated her from both fans and colleagues. Her absence was often covered by PR-friendly explanations, but internally, it was a growing obstacle to ABBA's unity and momentum. At the moment, Agnetha would fight with guilt, being a mother from afar, while her children were back home in Sweden during the times she had to go for tours or recording sessions. The few interviews with her mentioned how she would be weeping on airplanes, a thorn in her side, at the same time as her daughter cried every time she pulled away. The pulling away of affection toward her career and family had become not only an irritation, but also an absolute life ruiner. This private agony became foreign to the people, leaving an entire overflow for Agnetha's fame, polished vocals, and well-poised stage presence, which acted in further drowning her currently deteriorating mental condition. She began canceling appearances and wishing for more withdrawal, wishing she could be a more prominent presence in her kids' lives. The amount of glory and glamour, the thousands of spangles adorning costumes and hits that found their way to the very top of the charts, actually represented an internal conflict within Agnetha during her ABBA days. She complied with fame as a woman screaming inside, breaking down silently under its weight. For her closest community, her withdrawal from the limelight in the wake of the informal split of the group in 1982 was really just the logical conclusion of her years trying to meet expectations she thought unbearable. What the public was shown was a pop icon. What they didn't see was a woman torn between the spotlight and her need to disappear from it. Stalkers, betrayal, and Agnetha's retreat into isolation. In the years following her gradual withdrawal from the public spotlight, Agnetha Fältskog's life took a darker turn, one marked not by the pressures of fame, but by threats to her personal safety. After years of being idolized by fans around the world, the line between admiration and obsession was crossed in ways that would leave lasting scars. One of the most traumatic episodes began with a romantic relationship that quickly unraveled into tabloid betrayal. Torbjörn Brander, a former detective who had briefly dated Agnetha in the 1990s, sold details of their private life to the press. What should have been a safe, personal connection became public fodder, complete with invasive stories and intimate photos published without her consent. But the betrayal by Brander was only a prelude to a far more disturbing chapter. Around the same time, Agnetha became the target of a stalker, Gert van der Graaf, a Dutch fan whose obsession escalated into a dangerous fixation. He followed her across Sweden, moved near her countryside home on the island of Eckerö, and repeatedly violated restraining orders. Reports describe him staring through her windows, sending her letters, and refusing to stay away even after multiple police interventions. Though authorities attempted to protect her, his presence became an ongoing threat that she couldn't shake, leaving her in a state of chronic fear. This constant sense of being watched took a toll, not only on her emotional well-being, but on her whole lifestyle. Friends and inner circles began to say that she started avoiding even routine trips to town, surrounding herself with security systems and high fences. The once peaceful retreat into rural life had become a kind of self-imposed prison. Her estate, which was meant to shield her from the noise of fame, was now an impregnable fortress against real danger. Some say those who remained close with her, Agnetha, had been sleeping with the lights on, checking doors and windows at night. There was no longer just an emotional withdrawal, but rather her very survival. For the most part, the public remained unaware of how deep this fear went. To fans, she had merely become reclusive, perhaps a little eccentric. But the truth, as revealed by police reports and hushed interviews, was much darker than that. Agnetha was not just escaping from the spotlight. She was retreating from a world that had turned against her in the most invasive ways. She was not silent out of mystery. She was silent out of self-protection. This was not a diva tantrum. This was her last remaining choice. The song that never was, Northern Light. One of the most unexpected revelations from Elvis Costello's 2025 interview was not about feuds, breakdowns, or fame. It was about a song that was never heard. Costello admitted, almost offhandedly, that he once wrote a song specifically for Agnetha Fältskog. The composition, titled Northern Light, was never recorded, never sent, and never even shared with her. He described it as a haunting, delicate piece inspired by her voice, one he imagined only she could interpret properly. The song wasn't created for commercial release, but as a personal expression of something he couldn't say directly to her at the time. Costello spoke with surprising emotion about the creation of Northern Light, calling it a private tribute to someone I didn't fully understand but couldn't stop thinking about. He claimed the melody came to him after watching an old ABBA performance late at night, one where Agnetha barely smiled, yet sang with devastating clarity. Something in her restraint struck him, he said. He composed the song quickly, but kept it hidden, unsure if sending it would be seen as intrusive. "I didn't want to be another man putting expectations on her," he said. "She'd had enough of that." The song was shelved, and over the years, he came to see that silence as both respectful and deeply regrettable. It even knocked the audience of both artists off balance, as there had been a time when Costello, a fiercely independent songwriter, thought of writing a ballad completely for Agnetha. Some even started guessing what it would have been like or how it would have sounded with her voice. Costello did not divulge the complete lyrics, but narrates the chorus as a quiet apology wrapped in light. The phrase "Northern Light" allegedly stood for both her Scandinavian origin and the feeling of distance and beauty with which he associated her presence. When posed the question of whether he would consider recording it now, he was silent, then said, "That moment passed." And maybe that's the point. Simply, this song makes a discovery for the listener, the emotional phrase that it never gave voice to between two people. Would Agnetha have accepted the effort? Would she have even listened? Costello certainly didn't know, and still doesn't. Yet, in speaking of Northern Light, he did briefly open the door to what was an extraordinarily rare moment of vulnerability, admiration, and restraint that few expected from him. Not a hit single by any stretch, but most likely the most personal chapter of their quaint and lengthy relationship. A song unwritten in the public record, yet unforgettable once imagined. The compliment heard around the world. During the same 2025 interview that reignited conversations about his long-standing tension with Agnetha Fältskog, Elvis Costello delivered a moment of sincere and unexpected praise that stopped many listeners in their tracks. With no prompt or provocation, Costello simply said, "She has one of the greatest voices ever recorded." The tone in which he said it was striking, quiet, almost reverent. Coming from a figure known for his sharp wit and musical cynicism, the compliment didn't feel like an empty gesture or an olive branch. It felt like something long held that he finally chose to say out loud. The remark immediately trended online. Fans and media outlets alike seized on it, dubbing it the compliment heard around the world. For some, it felt like a surprising twist. How could someone who had once been so publicly critical now offer such high praise? But for others, it made sense in the context of everything Costello had just revealed. His relationship with Agnetha had never been about dislike. It had been a complicated mix of frustration, misjudgment, and, evidently, deep artistic respect. His admiration, it seems, was never about her fame or image, but about the soulfulness she brought to her music. What made the compliment resonate so strongly was its lack of conditions. Costello didn't reference her career's ups and downs, nor did he couch his words in qualifiers. He didn't say she was one of the best in pop or among the best in ABBA. He simply stated that her voice, in its own right, belonged in the highest ranks. It stood in contrast to decades of commentary that often painted Agnetha as a product of slick production and catchy songwriting. Costello's praise reframed the conversation. What if her vocal performance had always been the emotional anchor of it all? Agnetha, true to form, offered no public response. But according to a close source cited anonymously in Scandinavian press, she was made aware of Costello's words and was reportedly, quietly moved. Whether that's true or just wishful interpretation is unclear. Still, the moment served as a rare reversal in the narrative surrounding the two artists. Instead of closing a chapter on lingering tensions, Costello's words opened a new one not based in critique, but in reverence. Perhaps, for the first time, he was ready to separate the image from the individual and honor the voice that had lingered in his mind for decades. That single line of praise sparked more than reflection. It lit the fuse for something fans never imagined could still happen. The duet that might still happen. In the weeks following Elvis Costello's 2025 interview, an unexpected movement began to build across social media platforms and music forums. Fans calling for a duet between Costello and Agnetha Faltskog. Specifically, they wanted the two artists to record the unreleased song Northern Light, the ballad Costello revealed he had written decades ago with Agnetha's voice in mind. What began as a small group of loyal listeners discussing a hypothetical scenario quickly turned into a global online campaign, complete with petitions, fan-made cover art, AI-generated vocal simulations, and hashtags like #NorthernLightDuet and #CostelloFältskog. Change.org petitions gathered tens of thousands of signatures in days. Reddit threads analyzed every available quote from Costello's interview, speculating on the feasibility of a recording session. On YouTube, AI-generated mock-ups of what Northern Light might sound like with Agnetha's voice flooded the platform, some eerily convincing. The most viral clip paired imagined vocals with vintage ABBA-style visuals and racked up over 1 million views in under a week. Fans from multiple generations chimed in, not just for the novelty of the pairing, but out of what many described as a desire for closure. Two complicated careers, intertwined for decades, might find their resolution in one final act of artistic respect. The question remains, would either artist be willing to make it happen? Costello has not commented further on the possibility, though some music journalists say his tone during the interview left the door slightly open. Agnetha, as expected, has made no public statement. Still, insiders claim that the idea has reached her, and that she is aware of the momentum behind the push. Whether she feels moved, pressured, or indifferent remains a mystery. Given her history of retreating from public expectation, fans are tempering their hopes. Yet the movement shows no sign of slowing down. What's striking is how quickly this campaign evolved into something larger than just a musical wish. It's become a cultural moment, a reflection of how fans today engage not just with music, but with the emotional narratives behind it. If the duet ever comes to pass, it will represent more than just two legendary voices meeting in harmony. It will symbolize reconciliation, mutual recognition, and the power of late-in-life vulnerability. And if it doesn't happen, the movement still matters. Because in imagining the duet, fans are writing a story neither artist ever fully told, but perhaps always wanted to. And if it remains only a dream, it's still a powerful one. Born not from gossip, but from genuine longing. It proves that music history isn't just written by charts and awards, but by the unfinished sentences that linger in people's hearts. Sometimes, the most unforgettable songs are the ones that were never sung. In that silence, there's a kind of music too, a quiet chorus of what-ifs and almosts. It reminds us that art lives not just in what was, but in what could have been. Thanks for watching. If this left you thinking, hit that like button and let us know your thoughts in the comments. Should that duet actually happen? Don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into music's untold stories. And if you're ready for the next chapter, click the video on your screen now. We'll see you there.